Your car might be worth more than you think. Not to you. To someone who's running out of places they can legally exist tonight. This isn't some distant story about collapse happening somewhere else. It isn't a documentary about a place you'll never visit. It's happening in your city, on your street, in the parking lot you drive past every day without really looking. And what makes this so difficult to process is that most of the people sleeping in vehicles did exactly what they were told would work. They worked. They paid their bills. They followed the rules. They tried to be responsible. And they still ended up here. By the time we're done, you're going to see how a rental market that jumped 31% helped create an entire hidden population, and why the people getting hit hardest probably aren't the ones most people imagine. If you lost your housing tomorrow, how long would it take before your car stopped being transportation and became the place you sleep? Picture this for a second. It's 11 at night. A woman in her 50s is sitting in a Honda Civic outside a 24-hour grocery store. The engine is off because she's trying to save gas. The windows are cracked just enough to keep the air moving. She's not relaxing. She's listening, waiting, hoping tonight isn't the night a security guard taps the glass and tells her to move. This is not someone who gave up. This is someone who worked for decades and found out that doing everything right is no longer enough to guarantee a room with a door that locks. And that is the part most people don't want to admit. The majority of people living in vehicles are not there because they failed morally. They're there because the numbers stopped working. And before that sounds dramatic, let's get specific, because once you see what actually changed, this stops feeling like a fringe story and starts feeling uncomfortably close. There's this lazy explanation people like to fall back on. That people living in their cars just made bad choices. That they were reckless, lazy, irresponsible. That if they had planned better, budgeted better, worked harder, they'd be fine. Let's kill that idea immediately. People did not suddenly become less disciplined. They did not all wake up and decide to stop trying. What changed was much simpler and much more dangerous. Housing got harder to access than the average person could absorb. In major cities, apartment vacancy rates dropped to around 2.8%. Think about what that actually means. Imagine a parking garage with 100 spaces and only 3 are open. That's the rental market. Almost everything is already taken, and everybody who needs a place is competing for what's left. Once supply gets that tight, prices don't drift up gently. They surge. Between 2020 and 2025, typical rents climbed 31%, and forecasts kept pointing higher. A basic one-bedroom, not luxury, not trendy, not some high-rise with a rooftop deck, just a functional apartment, now sits in a range that millions of people simply cannot sustain month after month. And this is where the mainstream story usually misses the real turning point. People imagine housing instability as something that only affects those already at the bottom. But that's not how this works when supply collapses. First, it hits the people who are already stretched. Then it moves into working families. Then it catches people who thought they were safe because they were stable until one thing went wrong. A layoff, a medical bill, a divorce, a rent increase, a car repair, a few missed shifts. If there were available apartments, those would still be setbacks, but not disasters. You take the hit, regroup, find something smaller, move in with family for a bit, recover. But when there's nothing available and what does exist costs more than your income can support, there is no recovery lane. There's just a drop. That is the shift people miss. Cars and vans and RVs are not becoming housing because people romanticized vehicle living. They're becoming housing because every other option shut. That old sedan at the edge of a Walmart lot, the cargo van behind the industrial plaza, the RV near the highway exit. Most people see those and think temporary weirdness, maybe a personal issue, maybe somebody passing through. But what's actually happening is more structural than that. Vehicles have become the emergency housing stock of a country that stopped building enough places people can afford. That's why the phrase hits so hard. This is not mainly a compassion problem. It's a housing problem. We like to moralize homelessness because it lets us keep emotional distance from it. If it's about bad choices, then it's not about us. But if it's about economics, if it's about too many people chasing too few homes at prices detached from wages, then it gets a lot harder to pretend this is somebody else's life. And by 2026, people are not always getting pushed directly onto the sidewalk. More and more of them are getting pushed into their vehicles first because the vehicle is the last remaining private space they still control. Now, a lot of people hear that and think, okay, but at least a vehicle must be cheaper than rent. No landlord, no lease, no deposit. You just park somewhere and cut expenses. On paper, that sounds almost rational. In reality, it's one of the biggest misunderstandings in this whole conversation. Vehicle living is not free. It's just a different stack of costs, and in a lot of cases those costs are rising fast enough to crush people anyway. Start with heat. A propane canister that used to be an inconvenience is now a survival bill. You're not buying one for the whole season. You're replacing it every few days. Every cold front becomes a new expense. When you're housed, winter is weather. When you're living in a vehicle, winter is a bill. And then there's fuel. The moment local enforcement makes it impossible to remain in one place, your shelter becomes mobile whether you want it to be or not. Every time you have to start the engine and move, every mile you drive to avoid a ticket or find a quieter place to park, your housing cost is ticking upward in real time.